Wonderful. Thank you, band. Always supplying us with great music. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. Good to see everyone. Every week in the NEXUS Weekly, I'm sending out a proverb for you to fill in the blank. The proverb this week was, next one there, he who does not wet his pants. An old Montenegrin saying, and the real answer is this: he who does not wet his pants does not catch fish. Doesn't make sense, right? Hey, you want to catch fish, you got to get in the water. Now, the winner this week is Bronson Taylor, because he inundated me with responses. He texted me over 5 responses to that. Some of them I'm a little hesitant to put on the screen. But Bronson Taylor won this week. I am going to insist in the future 1 entry per person. What Bronson is winning is what's interesting to me. And I forgot the book somewhere. I have it for you. What you're winning, Bronson, is the book Letters from a Nut. And I have to tell you about this series of books. I discovered them this summer, and I've been using them as bedtime reading ever since. And I got to be honest with you, these books have caused some marital discord between Kristen and I, because these books have me laughing so hard in bed. My chortling and snickering in bed has woken up Kristen several times, and she has not been happy about it. But I can't resist. I can't put these books down. I'm on the 3rd edition already. And what makes Letters from a Nut, what makes it so interesting and unique is its premise. The author, Ted Nancy, simply writes the most hysterically outlandish letters to companies and then prints their responses. And my plan was to read you some of them, but I knew that I could just not do it justice. So I needed someone who could capture Ted Nancy's voice. So I've enlisted the help of my very good friend, Glenn. Would you come? And can we get Kristen's mic on here? I just don't quite trust that one this morning. Glenn is going to read 2 letters from Letters from a Nut. And if you would pause between 1 and 2, because I put the response behind you. Just 15-second pause between. You know what? Let's ask him after. They were funny, but I didn't put them on the screen for a reason.
Palace Station Hotel and Casino, Las Vegas, Nevada. Dear Palace Station, I want to check into your hotel on January 31st. I travel with my own soda pop vending machine. I find the soda machine to be far superior to any soda machines in any hotel I've ever stayed in. It's good for my thirst and they carry most flavors. Yours does not have orange. Is this a problem? Checking in with it, bringing it into my room. I can lift it myself even though it's a standard size soft drink vending machine. The soda machine is important to me, both for physical comfort, also for mental relaxation. It will stay in my room for my thirst only. Then I won't have to go into the hallway with a bunch of porters. I'm not selling soda. So please let me know if I can check in with my own soda machine. Thanks, Palace Station. I have heard you're exceptionally nice to your guests and go out of your way to accommodate them when it comes to their own vending machines. That's why I always stay at the Palace Station Hotel. And I'll always return my room key promptly. Sincerely, Ted Nancy. Woodmark Hotel, Kirkland, Washington. Dear reservations, I wish to make a reservation for your fine hotel for 2 nights, October 6th and 7th. I want to explain the situation, which I want to make you aware of. I travel with 2,200 red ants. Although these are loose ants, they will be kept only in the hotel room. All 2,200 red ants will be accounted for, and none will leave the hotel room or be left in the room. I will keep all sweets tied with a twisted tie bag, including pretzels. They will not venture far from the bags. Trust me. These ants are not pets, so your no pet rule should not apply. I travel with these ants for a reason. I watch them. It calms me down. I watch for hours as they work. Then I'm refreshed and ready to go. I like watching them moving about the room. They carry a crumb across the room, and I watch this. It has a very calming effect on me and helps me with my business. You'd be surprised what a conversation piece over 2,000 ants can be during a business meeting. When I have a business visitor to my room on October 6th or 7th, we will both watch these ants and then get down to business. I will describe these red ants to you. They are 1/16 of an inch long, weigh less than 1/10 of an ounce per handful. They are reddish with some spotting and have ant features. I do not drink, I don't smoke, I don't take drugs. Once I took a mushroom. I had red ants to relax me. Please confirm with me there is a reservation for dead ants.
I don't know. Those crack me up a lot. And the whole book is filled with them. They're just so crazy. That for you when I cough. I'm sorry. Ted and Nancy's book. His book are filled with these letters, and they will make you cry laughing. Or in my case, I just shake in the bed quietly, but wakes Kristen up sometimes. But what is almost as interesting to me as these absurd letters is the responses. Some companies respond right with like care and concern. Others are sort of curt, brush them off. Some of them, of course, they just respond with the most meaningful, accommodating responses you've ever seen. It's just absolutely amazing. Because what's really interesting to me about their responses is that the book gives you great insight into how different companies treat their customers. Customer service is really all about empathy and trying to understand the needs of their customers. And so many businesses don't seem to get this. But when they do, they can teach us a whole lot about empathy. And this morning is all about trying to hear the voice of God through empathy. And so to start, I just want to give you a definition of empathy. Empathy is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. In short, empathy is understanding and entering into another person's feelings. And in many ways, empathy is what helps us define morality, right? The reason we can't stand immoral behavior is because we can empathize with the victims of those behaviors. Empathy binds us together. It's the heart of morality, and it all begins with a simple question. If I were in this person's shoes, how would I feel about that? It's the heart of Jesus' call to love others as ourselves. And interestingly enough, some of the best examples of empathetic behavior come from the world of customer service. Next slide. This past summer, I was with my cute little friend Riley there. We were out at Mesa Verde in Colorado, visiting the ancient ruins there. So fascinating, such a fascinating place. And we were out visiting these ruins. It's the ruins of the Anasazi, the ancestral Pueblan people, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 years ago. They had civilizations up in these cliffs, and they mysteriously vanished, disappeared. I want to talk about that more in the new year. So we're there, and it starts raining, and everyone leaves because it's raining, and there's just Riley and I and the park ranger hanging around. So we got this park ranger to ourselves. We start asking him questions. And eventually we're asking him questions about the site. Eventually we got to, like, what's the worst part of your job? And he said, people. He said, the tourists, present company excluded, he said. He said, they're just so, his words, not mine. He said, they're so stupid. They ask the worst questions. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you will not believe the 3 most popular questions I receive right here at Mesa Verde. I'm like, really? What are they? He's like, let me tell you. Number 1, Why did they build the cliff dwelling so far away from the highway? Yeah. Number 2, how many cliff dwellings haven't been discovered yet? Could you give me an idea? How many? And then number 3, at what elevation do deer turn into elk? Every day. These are the 3 most popular questions this guy gets. We were like, seriously, we have to write this down. I've been waiting months to use this here. I mean, these are ridiculous. I said, how do you respond? And he's this sort of gruffy, sort of seasoned park ranger, and he's like, well, I respond with sarcasm and condescension. It's not hard to see why with those questions, right? Here's the thing, though, about empathy. If we're honest, a whole lot of people to us in life seem stupid. A whole lot of people in life to us seem lazy or ignorant. And the thing about empathy is this: it's not just identifying with and trying to understand people who break our hearts, children in Africa. Empathy requires us to step into the shoes of people we think are stupid. And being empathetic is not easy because of that. A lot of times, it means placing ourselves in the shoes of a person or group of people we feel are stupid, lazy, and ignorant. And bizarrely enough, do you know who does this really well? Disney. If park rangers face bizarre questions, so does Disney. At Disney World, if you visit Disney World, apparently there is something that's called the 3 o'clock parade. And can you guess what one of the most popular questions park employees face at Disney World? You guessed it. Excuse me, could you tell me what time the 3 o'clock parade begins? Really? I was like, that's crazy. In 2007, NBC, they did a report about Disney World, and what highlights Disney and sets Disney apart in many ways is its customer service. And so they are trained from the beginning, instead of responding with sarcasm or condescension to what time does your 3 p.m. parade start, they are trained to be completely empathetic. And so one of the responses, the parade starts at 3 p.m. at Frontierland. It'll be by here, perhaps by 3:20. And then they're instructed to help them. Could I find a place for you to wait in the shade? And it's a fascinating lesson to me because empathy asks us to put ourselves in the shoes of people we might consider stupid. And empathize even with that. Beyond that, it's about putting ourselves in the shoes of those we consider lazy. Consider this. Disney did a study. And what they found is that people who bought hard candy at Disney would leave the store, and at around 27 steps, they would throw the wrapper to the ground. Which to me is just lazy. Just put it in your pocket. But instead of responding that way, what did Disney do? They have set up a garbage can every 25 steps. At Disney World. Why? We know you're lazy, so we're just going to make it so easy. Right at that moment when you're about to throw it on the ground, there will be a garbage can waiting for you. Disney's customer service is noted as some of the best in the world. It all starts with empathy. And one of their core philosophies, which I think all of us could adopt, use in a variety of ways, is this: it's not my fault, but it's my problem. Which means even though visitors may approach Disney employees with a silly question, a random question, a weird predicament, an employee is always trained to own the problem. Might not be their fault, but they can own it as their problem. Think about that for a second. So many areas in life, what if we took that philosophy? It's not my fault, but I'll make it my problem. What if the church, in so many different areas, adopted, might not be our fault, but we'll make it our problem? Or consider Zappos, the shoe company. It pains me that they're not available in Canada. They were for a while, and then they stopped because they could not deliver on their high customer service. Company's philosophy is threefold: empathy, kindness, and humility. And you think, well, I'm sure lots of companies have that. How does that play out? It starts with this: their hiring practices. When they hire someone, they're an online shoe store. I don't think I explained that. They sell shoes online. When they hire an employee, there's a 4-week training process. At the end of that 4 weeks, they offer employees $1,000 to quit. Here's $1,000. We want you to quit. What they're trying to do is weed out people who don't share their philosophy. They're looking to weed out people who are more interested in money than the company's philosophy. In 2007, 3% of their hired employees took the money and ran. In 2008, only 1% did. In 2009, no one did. And so the next year, they upped it to $2,000. And that's just the beginning. I think there's something fascinating here about empathy. You know, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks and teaches about going the extra mile. Someone asks for your shirt, give them the one off your back. Someone asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. When you place yourself in someone else's shoes, what you realize quite quickly is this. I think all of us deep down wish that there were people who would go the extra mile for us. Did you ever think that, it would be nice occasionally if people would do more for me than what is expected? And Zappos cracks me up because they just breathe this. They have a 365-day return policy. You have a year to return items. They also have this policy. You can order 10 pairs of shoes, try them all on, pick the one you like, send 9 back. No questions asked. You're not sure of your fit, order a 9, 9.5, 10. Order them all, get the one that fit. You can return, no questions asked. If they're out of stock of something, their employees are taught, direct them to 3 other competitors and help them find the sale there, which means Zappos loses the sale. And it's interesting, they're not trying to maximize profits. What they're trying to do is build a lifelong relationship by communicating to you, we will always go the extra mile for you. And it works well to make profit. We will always go the extra mile. Consider this, I love this story. So the CEO of Zappos, Tony, can't pronounce his last name, Hysia, once took some clients out for a night on the town. At 2 a.m., they all went back to their hotel room. One of his clients lamented, I could really go for some pizza right now, but the kitchen is closed. So the CEO said, call Zappos. What? Call Zappos, have them order a pizza for you. You have to understand what the CEO just suggested. He told his client to call his company, a shoe company, at 2 in the morning and ask for a pizza. And so the client did. There was a short pause on the phone, and then the operator found 3 pizza places close by and ordered the client a pizza. That is going the extra mile. I can't tell you how badly I wish Zappos was in Canada. One final story, one final lesson in empathy before I move on from the business world. Empathy isn't easy. It means going the extra mile for people, but it also means that empathy is going to cost us. A few years ago, a man needed to get from LA to Denver. He needed to get home to see his 3-year-old grandson for the very last time. The boy, through some tragic circumstances, had been beaten by some close relatives, and he was going to pass away that night at 9 p.m. They were going to use his organs to help save other lives. So this grandfather needs to get to Denver to see his grandson final time. He calls Southwest Airlines. Arrange a last-minute flight. Gets the flight, but he gets held up in LA traffic. By the time he makes it to the airport, he encounters long lines at security. He doesn't make it to the gate on time. In fact, he shows up 12 minutes after the plane is supposed to have taken off. And he gets there and he finds the pilot waiting. And the pilot says to him, they can't go anywhere without me, and I'm not going anywhere without you. Southwest Airlines is consistently voted top airline for customer service. They made money even through the 9/11 crisis. Because that pilot knew his company would stand behind him, even though, if you think about it, there are hundreds of reasons why they shouldn't have waited for the man. It costs thousands of dollars for an airline every time they're just 5 minutes late. And yet, Southwest said, we'll pay the money. We'll take the cost. It's going to cost us, but we'll do it because that's how we treat our customers. You know, empathy is the thing that makes this world a beautiful place. It isn't easy. It asks us to go the extra mile. It costs something of us. But it makes the world so beautiful. And in a world that is torn apart by so many divisions, the simple idea of trying to understand what it must be like for someone, for another person, that other group of people, to me, it's a complete beacon of hope. And to be honest, it's one of the main reasons I'm so drawn to the Christian faith and the story that it tells. It's one of the main reasons that I'm so drawn to Christ, because the Christian story is hinged upon empathy and vulnerability. The story speaks of a fractured relationship between God and humanity, a world of discord, tension, misunderstanding. And in the Christian story, the decisive moment comes when God, in empathy and humility, decides to walk in our shoes. God decides to enter into and understand the human dilemma. Read this in John 1, poetic words. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Beautiful poetic words to describe the cosmic Christ. And then a few verses later, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The Christian story is so unique because it tells of a God who enters our experience. So unique. And so in Christ, we have the portrait of a God walking in our shoes, a God empathizing with us. In Christ, the writer of Hebrews says this, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. I have a number of meetings like this where I sit with people and we talk about God. It's fascinating to me how often people's perceptions of God is fear. Fear. I'm scared. What if I don't believe right? What if I don't do the right things? What if I'm not entirely doing the right things for my children? How is this God going to respond? And I find such beauty and confidence in this, that this God, this Christian story we try to follow and read ourselves into. It's not a God who sees us from this high seat of moral superiority, but it looks at us through the eyes of empathy. I get it. And on this highest level, what's so alluring to me is, I don't know about you, but I find life tiring, confusing. I'm so uncertain of a ton of things. So often I'm just feel like I don't know what to do in life. Feel like throwing my hands up. And it's in that moment that fear steps in and goes, what if God is going to hammer me for that? And I go, no. This passage here is so moving to me. We can approach God with confidence. Why? Because in God's empathy, it's all about mercy, all about grace. And so every time I'm feeling lazy, every time I'm feeling tired, weary, don't know what to do, full of doubt, I can just hear God whispering, I get it. I get it. I know what it's like. Not looking at you from this high seat of moral superiority. And the interesting thing is this God models for us in the incarnation empathy and then asks us to exhibit it as well. The God of empathy asks us to be a people of empathy. And it won't be easy. And it will force us to go the extra mile. And it might even cost us something as well. But the God who empathizes with us asks us now to empathize with others. So how do we do that? I want to introduce you to a person named John Rawls. And to this question, his most famous work a theory of justice. Rawls proposes an imagination exercise I want us all to go on this morning, okay? Rawls asks, and let's place it in terms of this room, he asks that we imagine that this group of people here this morning, we have been put in charge of creating a new society. We are going to dream up and create a new society, and then we're eventually going to be a part of it. But he asks us to create this new society behind what he calls the veil of ignorance. And the idea for the imagination exercise is this. Once people create this new society, we will then enter it randomly, by luck of the draw. And so in our imaginations, we have to consider, what would an ideal society look like when you have no idea where you're going to end up within it? So is it possible you could end up, perhaps, after creating this new society, you could end up with a much better life, perhaps, than you feel you have right now? But you could also sort of draw a much worse one. Let me give you two examples. I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to be rude here, okay? Please note, I'm not trying to be rude with these examples. I simply picked 3 demographic factors in each case that are associated with being in a compromised position versus a privileged position in both the US and Canada. So, my intention is not to be rude. Bear with me. Let's imagine we as a group here said, okay, we're going to create a new society. You know what? The United States of America, that looks like a great society. Let's create the United States of America. Now, having done that, who of us here would be willing to draw a black woman who lives in Baltimore, who happens to be poor and has a low IQ? How many of us would say, okay, now I'm willing to enter back into the society we've created in that position? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't. Or let's think about Canada. Perhaps we said, you know what, Canada's a great society. Let's just recreate a new society. Let's just make it Canada. Let me ask this question. Who would be willing to draw an Aboriginal male living in Ottawapiskat in his teens with a low education? Who's willing to roll the dice and say, Canada is the perfect society, but I might, in the lottery, end up being that team? My guess is very few of us. And this is the point of the exercise. If you wouldn't be willing to draw either of those two positions, then the question goes back to the group, well, then what would you need to do? What would need to be done so that you would be okay taking on the identity of anyone within society? The veil of ignorance exercise is incredibly powerful because what it does is it allows you to think through. It makes you sort of empathize with everyone. And so take, for example, let's say just one factor. Let's say you were born with a low IQ. Just one factor. Now, chances are you think through your life and you go, I'm probably not going to end up being a doctor or a lawyer. Probably not. Probably, chances are, I'm going to be working a blue-collar job, which is fine. But if that's the case, you want to make sure what? If I'm born into that situation, I want to make sure that for everyone who works a blue-collar job, they get a good wage, they have job security, they have health benefits for themselves and their family, they have a good school for their kids, they have the ability to take time off, go on vacation, so on and so forth. This is the idea. You want to have measures in place, ensure no matter what you draw, where you end up randomly back in the society, you have a chance of being safe, respected, you have a decent life. And so with that in mind, consider, I just made up a few here on the screen, next slide, a veil of ignorance lottery. And consider where you are right now and what would happen if in all of these categories you randomly drew something besides what you are now. Different age, different ethnicity, different sex, gender, relationship status, sexual orientation, education. What are your addictions? Maybe it's just coffee right now, but you could draw being addicted to heroin. You don't know. Income, politics, religion, physicality, work, personality, neediness, health, IQ. So many different things you could draw in this lottery. How do you ensure that no matter what you draw, what you end up with, it's fair and safe for you? Now, Julie helped me here put together a veil of ignorance lottery. And what I'm going to ask, if you're comfortable, at the end of the service, just as a thought experiment, come up and draw and see, just randomly, might your identity change a little bit. I'm going to do it once. So gender, we start with gender here. So in a veil, see, female. Already things are going a little differently for me. Age, I've got a few here. 36 to 65. Well, I'm turning 36 next month. That's about the same. Province, is that right? Province here. Oh, Quebec. Yay. Nothing against, my wife teaches French immersion. Nothing against there. Household. I'm a couple without children. I can't tell you how much that would change my life. I didn't say in a good way. How am I going to die? This one's a little weird. Other. That's no fun. Other. Well, what am I looking for here? I don't want something bad. Oh my goodness. Suicide. So I probably have some mental health issues in my new position in life. Female, 36, living in Quebec. What's my income? I'm above poverty. All right, that's good, that's good. Am I a visible minority? I'm a visible majority, okay? Immigration. Here, was I born here? Did I come from somewhere else? I was born in Canada, okay? My ability. I can do regular daily activity. My literacy is literate. I'm literate. So a lot stays the same for me, but there's some massive differences as well. And so the question for me become holding these, let's say I did this, what would I need in place to be comfortable being born female in Quebec, 36 to 50, obviously with some severe mental health issues? What do I need our society to be in order to be comfortable with that? I'll tell you what, I want to make sure as a woman that I'm paid equally. I want to make sure there's some safeguards in place for people who struggle with mental health. I want to make sure that's really strong. Being from Quebec, maybe I also want my own, don't want to be a part of Canada. I don't know. I don't know what I want. But you get the idea, right? You get the idea. You don't know what you're going to draw. And when you're creating a society, you have to take into account you could draw anything. And it could be drastically different than what you are now. It's complete luck of the draw. And so in creating this society, you have to ensure no matter what happens, no matter what I draw, I want to make sure I'm looked after. That I have a good chance at a decent life, right? You think, what does this all have to do with letters from a nut and customer service and empathy? Here's the thing. It's just an exercise. It's impossible to start from scratch. You could say this, the game is already afoot. We don't get to create an ideal society, so we have to do the next best thing, and that's empathize. We will never be able to truly understand what it means to have different traits than other people than we do right now. We will never be able to truly understand how fair life seems for someone with a totally different perspective than us. But the next best thing we can do is imagine it. Try. And the point is this, the only way to create a just and fair society is imagine what it's like to be other people. What is it like to be unemployed? What's it like to have a physical disability? What's it like to have mental illness? What's it like to be born less than beautiful? What's it like to be born prone to addiction? The list goes on and on and on and on. And it doesn't even have to be just this macro level, right? It can start right here with the people in this room. What's life like for people here? What about the people at my workplace? Or what does it look like on your street, your block, your city? What about in your relationships? Kristen and I did this exercise this week. It was fun, but not fun at the same time. What we imagined, we had this conversation, is that we had a two-card deck. Brad and Kristen. Shuffle it up. We imagine what would happen if we drew randomly from that deck. We could end up with each other's identity. Would we be comfortable if we ended up in one another's shoes? Kristen was giddy with excitement to be me. She's like, what an amazing thing that would be. You sip coffee and read for work. She's like, that sounds great. She's like, you go out on Tuesday nights for beers with friends as part of NEXUS Connect. That's your job. I, on the other hand, was terrified at the prospect of drawing Kristen's identity from the 2-card deck. I realized in that moment I would in no way be comfortable being her. And it helped me realize in that position what her life is like. And the reason I wouldn't be comfortable is this. It would mean, it would boil down to, wow, I am with the kids way too much. I have problems just with a couple hours being around my 3 kids and keeping my cool. Imagine all day being with them. I was visibly uncomfortable if thinking about taking her position. I was like, oh my goodness. And what it prompted for us is this, okay, if you take the veil of ignorance exercise and even just apply it to your own relationship, the question then becomes, what then would be the things we need to do so that I would be comfortable if I drew Kristen's identity? It boiled down to this. For me, it would ultimately be less time with me, more breaks. She's never done this before. She wrote in my sermon here. She wrote in here, more breaks with the kids and a whole lot more chocolate. That's pretty funny. All right, nice work there. That's what it would take to even the playing field a little bit. But it was a fascinating exercise, right? What needs to change in a relationship so that I would feel comfortable even if I was Kristen? And it's an imagination exercise, I get it. But it helps us put ourselves in other people's shoes. And the fascinating thing for me is this. In very few places in life is empathy mandatory. And I would suggest many of our problems in the world boil down to that. Empathy isn't mandatory in the business world, which is why when we hear stories about Disney, Zappos, Southwest, it's shocking to us, right? Go, oh my goodness, those are amazing stories. Part of me goes, why is that shocking? Why is empathy not mandatory in more businesses and companies? Empathy isn't mandated in our workplaces. It's not mandated on our streets. It's not mandated in our cities. It's not really mandated anywhere. But here's what I'm convinced of, and bear with me. I believe empathy is mandatory in one place, and that's the church. And I know what you're thinking. Are you kidding me, Brad? For some of us, that is the last place where you have felt empathy. And I get it. But when I look at the New Testament writers and how they envisioned and instructed the early church, it seems so obvious to me. Taking their cue from an empathetic God, they believe church is the one place empathy should be found in abundance. They envisioned it being the one place where asking ourselves what it would be like to be in someone else's shoes is mandatory. If you look very carefully in the New Testament, there's this thing called the one another passages. They're referred to as the one another passages. There's about 50 of them total. They're all instructions on community life. And they're various places all around the New Testament. But when you combine them together, it's fascinating. Because these passages are all concerned with what it means to live in community together. And you start to get the impression that for the New Testament writers, empathy was huge. For instance, about a third of the one another commands in the New Testament deal with the unity of the church. Be at peace with one another. Don't grumble among one another. Be of the same mind with one another. Accept one another. Wait for one another before beginning the Eucharist. Don't bite, devour, consume one another. Don't boastfully challenge or envy one another. Gently, patiently tolerate one another. Be kind, tenderhearted, and forgiving to one another. Bear with and forgive one another. Seek good for one another. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't complain against one another. Confess sins to one another. And then the other third, or another third of them, instruct Christians to love one another in like about 10 different places. Love one another. Through love, serve one another. Tolerate one another in love. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Be devoted to one another in love. And then about 15% of them are all about humility with one another. Give preference to one another in honor. Regard one another as more important than yourselves. Serve one another. Wash one another's feet. Don't be haughty, be of the same mind. Be subject to one another. Clothe yourselves in humility toward one another. And the rest of them are just a hodgepodge of do not judge one another. Don't put a stumbling block in one another's way. Greet one another with a kiss. Bear one another's burdens. Speak truth to one another. Don't lie to one another. Comfort one another. Encourage and build up one another. Stimulate one another to love and good deeds. Pray for one another. Be hospitable to one another. When you stick them together, you start to realize that for the New Testament writers, it was all about one another. And it all hinged on empathy. And when the New Testament writers envisioned this church thing, this community of people following Christ in the world, it was a place where empathy is the norm. Empathy. And you know, we need it globally. We need global empathy. We need national empathy. We need local empathy. But I truly believe the best place to practice it, to start it, is here. I think the vision of the church in the New Testament to me is spectacular in its simplicity and small-scale vision. And the vision was simply this. Here's a small community of people. Can you get along with them? That's it. Here's a small group of people. Can you empathize with them? Can you practice these one another's? And what I believe in terms of God whispering is I think God whispers through empathy. I believe he whispers through Scripture. And I believe what God whispers to us is this. I've given you a group of people. Can you work at getting along and sharing each other's burdens? God is a God of empathy. It's written in God's character. It's the story of salvation. In that, God calls us to lead lives of empathy as well. And so with this group here, whatever we are, 100, 150 with kids, maybe if everybody was in the room at the same time. With this group here, what can we do? Where does empathy take us? Well, collectively, I believe and already know this. Our actions that come from empathy have taken us in many different global, national, local issues where justice and fairness is badly needed. I know so many of you working because of empathy in so many different causes. But on a much more organic level, I suspect God might be whispering to us, can you begin to empathize right here in this room? And it won't be easy. Because the truth is, we'll probably suspect that some of us are stupid, or maybe lazy, or ignorant. And it's going to ask us to go the extra mile. It's going to be like, you know what? I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of dealing with this person, that person. Empathy calls us, keep walking, keep going. It's going to cost something from us, probably our patience at times. But I feel as though God's whisper to us is this. Can you make it happen just right here, in this room, with these people? Can you start here? Can we work to empathize and carry one another's burdens on this level? Because if the world is going to be made a better place, if we can't make it happen on this level, what chance do we have at making it work on a bigger level?